So I just saw The Bike Riders and it was kind of boring. So this film is about Austin Butler being a bad boy and riding a silly bike around for like 2 hours. I thought this movie looked pretty bad when I first saw the trailers, but then I rewatched the trailers and I mean it's not bad, but it's just kind of mid. All the trailers really showed was Austin Butler riding around on the silly bike and that's about it. It's been a while since I saw the trailers, so I might not have the most accurate thoughts on what I thought at that time because all I wrote down was a Drive reference, but it just didn't seem that interesting. Why should I care about a biker gang? That just doesn't seem like a very interesting story. So the Bike Raiders gets like a 5 on anticipation. Alright, let's get into the film. So what this film is mostly about is Benny and Kathy's relationship. They aren't the main focus of the film. It does focus a lot more, and I mean a lot more, on separate subjects, but they're kind of the plot that gets the most focus, and it was shown in the trailers quite a lot, so I figured I would talk about Benny, then Kathy, then the two of them together, and what the movie does with them. So Benny overall is alright. Austin Butler does a pretty good job. In fact, basically everyone in this film does a good job, and Austin Butler was probably the best. He had one scene at the end that was enough to make him my pick for the best performance in the film. But overall, this is a pretty stacked cast, and everyone did a very good job. Nothing outstanding, but it was all very solid. Anyways, Benny was okay. He doesn't really change at all throughout the movie, and the decision he makes at the end of the film makes no sense, but he's alright. He also has some funny moments. This movie isn't really a comedy, but whenever they try to make jokes and Austin Butler has to deliver the line, he does well, and they're pretty funny. I won't spoil it, but there's also a major moment in this film that impacts Benny a lot, but then they kind of just skip around it, and they just skip time. And then he no longer has this issue, which really bothered me. Kathy is also alright. She's kind of the main character, and she's fine. It did feel very, how do I say this, kind of sexist. The way she was written, like almost all she talks about is her man, so it's kind of iffy. It's not very good writing, but she does actually develop more throughout the movie, and when she's at that point, she's alright. Okay, now Benny and Kathy's relationship in the movie is probably the most important segment because it actually sucks. I just don't feel any connection, or for that matter, any relationship whatsoever between them. I only noticed this about 1 hour in when they actually had a scene of them doing something together, because it was the first time in the movie since the opening that they were doing anything together in the whole film. So once the drama aspects of the relationship happen in the film, I really don't care because they've literally had no screen time to showcase that they actually even like each other. To keep the negative tone going, let's talk about editing. Okay, it's not the worst thing ever, it's just kinda bad. It feels pretty cheap and not super well put together. They replay a lot of clips, which I'm okay with because it's just a little reminder about what they're talking about, but I don't like it when they play those clips for way too long. Like, they could just cut those parts down a ton and you would get the point across pretty easily. The sound mixing is also super off. Like, sometimes the music is so loud that you can't hear the voiceover. Like, I can't tell if it's intention or not, but there are moments where I actually can't hear the characters, or at least it's hard to make out over the music. And it's not like the place they're in is supposed to be super loud, just turn it down, it's not that hard. There's also a part of this film where they play background music, but then they just switch the tracks in a really sloppy way. It's kind of like a YouTube video, which, let's be honest, you should not be aiming for a YouTube video with your editing in your movie. So overall, I didn't really like the editing for this film. I think it's at its worst for the first 30 minutes and slowly gets better throughout, so it's just kind of passable. It didn't really bother me a ton, it's just mildly annoying sometimes. Okay, so if there's anything really unique about this film, it's how they style it. This is based on a true story, but at the same time, not really. If I'm right, this film was inspired by a picture book documenting this story, so this film often has moments of this interviewer creating the picture book that the film was actually based off. So definitely a lot of stuff that happened in this movie didn't actually happen in real life. This is a weird comparison, but it kind of reminds me of Oppenheimer and how it told its story by skipping back and forth in time. Of course, this film doesn't go to the extremes that Oppenheimer handles its story, but it does so in a similar way. That being telling several stories in different time periods that eventually connect by the end. Anyways, I really like this, and it makes what in my opinion is a pretty uninteresting story into something pretty cool. I like seeing how this club rose to fame and how it eventually fell, which I will talk about later. In general, this being a mostly true story makes this a lot more interesting in my opinion, and a lot of moments in this film get to look visually creative whenever the interview gets to take pictures of them. It's like you get to see what these characters are thinking with them literally talking into the camera, but it makes sense in the movie since it's from the interviewer's perspective, and allows you to understand more complicated scenes in the film since you already know a decent amount of the characters because of the interview scenes. Still, at the end of the day, despite all these improvements, I still didn't care a ton about the biker game plot, but it was a bit better. This film also focuses on a bunch of the other bikers, and honestly, I didn't like these guys very much. Some of them are good, Johnny's cool, and Sonny's alright. Him just showing up in the middle of the film with broken teeth is really cool. I don't know how to describe it, he's just a cool guy. Johnny's probably the best character in this film. He's probably the main person involved with everything that happens in this film, and while it's usually not from his perspective, he might actually get more screen time than Austin Butler, so that's pretty cool. For the rest of the bikers, they do some pretty bad stuff at the start of the film, but then later on in the film expects me to think that the new bikers added to the group are bad, even though they're literally doing the same things as the old bikers. It's much more extreme for sure, but I guess I just didn't really care about the rest. Also, what's with half of the bikers having normal names and the other half having names like Cockroach? Like, what's with that? It's just kind of weird overall. Okay, so for about the first hour and 20 minutes of this film, I wasn't really liking it. It was mediocre, just kind of lame and a tad boring with some good elements. Then the ending happened and it was actually pretty good, not gonna lie. I'll go into more detail soon, but to sum it all up, it was a pretty good way to wrap up the biker gang plot. It made the film more unique and had a pretty great ending, all things considered. So here's your spoiler warning for the film. Skip to the conclusion timestamp. Thank you. So first of all, I thought one of the coolest elements of this film that wasn't the unique style was this kid character. He shows up at the start of the film for a bit while seeing the biker gang and gets inspired by them and destroys a car. At first I thought it was kind of a weird moment to show their influence, but then he shows up later in the film with it showing his abusive home life before fighting back against his abusive dad, but in a really violent way, almost killing him. Then much later in the film, we see him trying to join the biker gang but gets shut down. These little moments all come together in the end where the kid angrily shows up and challenges Johnny, the leader of the group, to a duel and cheats by shooting him in the head. The kid then takes over the rest of the biker gang and actually turns it into a gang with them robbing and killing. I just thought this was a really cool way to end off the gang. I really like how it was the bikers' fault for their own demise, with them inspiring the person who would eventually take over the gang. Johnny's death then leads into another great scene of the film. At this point, Benny ditches everyone and he sees it on the news that Johnny dies. He comes back to Kathy, and at this moment I was really hoping they would make him cry, since it was established that he didn't cry for anything. But then he did cry and it was really great. This was the scene I was talking about before, with Austin Butler doing a really good job. And then the film wraps up real nice with the gang being destroyed and Benny and Kathy living peacefully, which was a great way to end this off. I really felt that 2-hour runtime, and honestly it kind of felt like 3 hours, and while some of it made the film very boring, I did get a little attached to these characters, and that made me actually happy that Benny and Kathy ended the film off on a happy note. The journey to get to that point was kind of rough, but I really liked the first 40 minutes and it definitely improved this film a lot. Overall, this film was fine, some poor editing and a kind of weak story that I didn't care about, but it had a really good ending, solid acting, and a pretty unique style of telling its story. Overall, the Bike Raiders gets a low 6 out of 10. I swear I'm working on the M&A episode and the Avatar video is going to come out soon, so trust me on that. Anyways, thanks for watching, and this is an epic outro.